Adab is key. Many times, we live in an era and a time where the Quran is disrespected in every way, shape, or form. Whether it's people just leaving it on their bookshelf and just collecting dust, or maybe people just reading it in the wrong way, misinterpreting the verses for their own pleasure and for their own whims. However you want to look at it, the Quran, is being disrespected, and there's no way that we can attain blessing and benefit from the Quran unless we learn how to respect it. How do we respect it? That's what this verse is teaching us. Listen carefully and pay attention. It's something we tell our children all the time. You're in class, your teacher is speaking, listen, pay attention. Even if you don't study properly, if you just pay attention and you listen carefully, you'll pass almost every exam, right? That is really that easy. Maybe some kids may need a little more, but if you really pay attention in class, that's really enough. Same thing here. If you pay attention to the Quran, just listen carefully, pay attention to it, that should be enough. Now, there's some fiqh nuances. Now, this verse has been used with many scholars. Like, for example, one question that often comes up is, okay, what about when we are praying salah? Are we supposed to recite the Quran behind the imam, or do we stay quiet? Right? So for this, there are actually a few different opinions amongst the ulama. And I'll start off with Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. According to them, when the Quran, if it's a jahri salah, which means it's a salah in which the qira'ah is loud, like Fajr, Maghrib, and Isha, where you can hear the imam, or it could be a salat al-tarawih or tahajjud, whatever. But any prayer in which you can hear the imam, then you are not allowed to read anything. All right, according to Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal. The sirri salah, if you cannot hear the imam, he's not doing qira'ah loudly, then you can go ahead and you can recite Surah Al-Fatiha, because the reason why this confusion comes, because there's a hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ said, La salata illa bi fatihatil kitab. There's no salah except with the recitation of Surah Al-Fatiha. So there's different interpretations for that. For Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad bin Hanbal, this is their interpretation. For Imam Shafi'i, there's a qadim qawl, and there's a jadid one, a new one. And the new one is that you have to recite it regardless whether it is jahri or sirri. Which means even if the imam is reading loudly, you would wait. You don't read while he's reciting. You never do that. When there's a gap in his recitation, that's when you recite your Surah Al-Fatiha during that gap. And the sirri, you can recite it. So that's the opinion of Imam Shafi'i, rahmatullah. And for the Hanafi madhab, according to the Hanafi madhab, which is the madhab I follow, we do not recite in any situation. Regardless whether it's jahri salah or sirri salah, we don't recite behind the imam. The imam is reciting. If he's leading the prayer, we don't lead. And there are many hadiths. For example, there's one hadith in which there's some companions. I think the Prophet ﷺ was leading either Dhuhr or Asr. They were all praying, and then one of the companions started reciting behind the Prophet ﷺ. So some of the other companions were trying. I think this may be before the prayer. They start their prayer. They were trying to tell him, don't recite behind the imam. Be quiet. He didn't listen to them. He ignored them. And he continued to read. Now, after the prayer is over, they started kind of arguing amongst each other about, whether you should or should not be. Well, why do you stop me from reciting? And they're like, no, you're not supposed to. Then the Prophet ﷺ, he heard of it. He said, "Man salla khalfa imamin fa inna qira'at al-imam lahu qira'atun." That whoever prays behind the imam, then the qira'ah of the imam, that is your qira'ah, which means you don't need to read anything. That is enough. And in another hadith, the Prophet ﷺ also affirmed, this is a hadith by Jabir radiallahu anhu, قال Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, "Man kana lahu imamun fa qira'atul imam lahu qira'atun." That whoever prays behind the imam, then the qira'ah of the imam will suffice for everybody else. You don't need to recite anything else. So for the Hanafi madhab, regardless of which prayer it is, we do not recite behind the imam. The imam's qira'ah is enough for us, whether it is a jahri salah in which the imam is reciting loudly, or is it sirri salah in which you don't hear the qira'ah of the imam. We don't say anything, we stay silent, because his recitation is enough for us. Then comes the issue of, well, what about when you're listening to qira'ah? For example, you're driving your car and you put on some Quran recitation. Is that okay? Or maybe you put it on in your house. So even for that, if you are listening to it, then it's okay. But even if you're doing something, so but as long as you're listening to it, like you're really, but if you're not listening to it, you're just putting it on in the background. I know it's a custom in some of the in Egypt and some of the Arab countries where they put on the qira'ah in the morning and they just leave it on and they just go about their business. They're not listening to it. You shouldn't do that. That's disrespectful to the Quran. The Quran is not something for our entertainment or our leisure. It's something that needs to be paid attention to. فَاسْتَمِعُوا لَهُ. Listen carefully. If you can't listen carefully, it's okay. Just don't listen to it. Listen to it later when you do have time. But don't just let the qira'ah and the recitation of the Quran continue and continue. No one's listening to it. No one's paying attention to it. That should never happen. And we should be respectful to the recitation of the Quran. Same thing, you're in a lecture, in a masjid, when the khutbah, especially the khutbah, people would, when the khutbah, I mean, every Jummah, whenever there's outsiders who come to our masjid, the number one complaint, please tell your musalli, stop talking during the khutbah. They're always talking on their phone. We have to, as a community, we need to stop that. When the imam is doing the khutbah, you need to be quiet, especially they're reading the Quran, verses of the Quran are being recited, hadith of the Prophet ﷺ are being recited. You need to be quiet and listen carefully, because that's where the hidayah is. By ignoring it, being on our phones, talking, especially during the khutbah, there's a specific hadith. When the imam comes out, there's no prayer, there's no salah, there's no talking, because these things ruin your Jum'ah. They ruin your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So even if you're just listening to a lecture, Quran being recited, be respectful. Listen to it. When it's done, then you can go on your way. If you're not really trying to listen, or you're doing something else, then it's okay. But we need to pay attention to these things. And this is basically essentially the rooting of this verse. I'll leave it for here today. I don't like to keep the classes very long. It's short, something that we can remember, something that's the information that's enough for us to remember. Just 2 verses we recited today. The first verse really taught us about how the people, they made unreasonable requests to the Prophet ﷺ, and that's not the responsibility of the Prophet ﷺ. هَذَا بَصَائِرٌ مِّن رَبِّكُمْ. This Quran, and this is the conclusion. There's only 2 more verses after this. هَذَا بَصَائِرٌ. This Quran is an insight. It's a treasure, and make sure you respect it as such, because it's only a treasure for those people who value this treasure, right? And then this second verse, which is 204. How do you take benefit from this treasure? What is the key? Is adab. It is respect. Listen carefully, pay attention, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mercy will shower upon you. Jazakallahu Khaira for everybody for listening and tuning in. Inshallah, next week at the same time at 7:45, we'll have our last and final tafsir of before Ramadan. In Ramadan, we'll have a daily tafsir. There's a program that we'll have. Inshallah, I'll give you updates. If you're on our Facebook page, please subscribe to our Facebook page. If not, you can send me an email or contact somebody, and inshallah we have an emailing list. We have Facebook. This is mainly how we kind of contact everybody. We also have Instagram and Twitter. So we post up updates on all these different mediums, these websites and social media platforms. So just please keep up, and inshallah we'll tell you for Ramadan we'll have a tafsir, a daily tafsir. We'll also have a special qira'ah. So we've invited a qari from Kansas City. He's an imam there, and we invited him actually 2-3 years ago, and he did beautiful voice, and he's been doing qira'ah for us every single day, inshallah. Every day we'll have the qira'ah, and inshallah we'll also have a dua right before Salat al-Maghrib. We'll start around 6:30, and we'll do these things on a daily basis, inshallah. But as far as this class, next week will be the last final one, and we'll also conclude the surah. Until then, Jazakallahu Khaira. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. If there are any questions, you can ask questions. I'm open to questions. You can go to the Q&A. I'll answer them for you, inshallah.